Welcome to the AFI Movie Club. I'm Shawn Edwards, your host for this week's celebration of cinema called Black Stories Matter. This is a partnership between AFI and Universal Pictures, and thanks to them, every movie this week is free for rental. And today's movie is BLACKKKLANSMAN, and we are talking to the BLACKKKLANSMAN, Ron Stallworth. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How's everyone?
Man, we're doing all right, man. I'm glad you have time to talk about this classic Academy Award-winning motion picture, BLACKKKLANSMAN. None of this would have existed if it weren't for you. So let's start from the beginning.
Don't leave out. It was the #1 New York Times bestseller too.
Well, I was talking about the movie first. I was going to get to that and talk about the book. I was going to get there and look at you. You're a salesman, man. You're plugging. You're jumping ahead. I want to set up the movie. Yeah, I know you got to do it. I was setting up the movie because people are going to check out the film if they haven't already seen it. So now that we've set up the movie, let's talk about the origins. None of this would have happened if it weren't for you and your experience as an actual police officer in Colorado Springs. Why did you decide, number one, to become a police officer? Why did you choose to locate in Colorado Springs?
In 1972, a year after I graduated from high school, my mother decided that she was going to make a move to Colorado Springs to be with her older sister, who was a military wife, husband stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado. So my mother came back from a visit there around June, July. And she said, we're moving. And a month later, we were in Colorado Springs. And in November of that year, I took the test for the police department. And there we go.
Why did you decide to become a cop?
I joined the department for one simple reason. I wanted to make enough money to go to college, put myself through college, and become a high school PE teacher. But after about a year of being on the job, A, I was having too much fun, and B, I was making twice as much money as a college graduate in the teaching profession. So I stuck it out for the next 32 years.
What was the racial demographic like in Colorado Springs in the early 70s?
Well, keep in mind, it was a military town. You had Fort Carson, Colorado, the Army base. You had Peterson Air Force Base. You had the Air Force Academy. And you had Air Force Base, which was mainly an administrative assignment. So like most military towns, you had a cross demographic of people. But there were not a lot, there was a black population, but it wasn't a significant black population. I couldn't give you the numbers.
But it was small-ish. It wasn't like large.
Well, no, it was not large at all.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you joined the Colorado Springs Police Department, and in the film, there's a great scene in which you're talking, to the department heads, and they're asking you why you want to join the force. I mean, let's take a look at that clip and then talk about like the beginnings of your duties and your time as a police officer in the early stages. Because I think this is a fascinating setup to the film and the premise, and a great setup to your experience on the force.
How do you get along with people generally?
Sir, they treat me right, I treat them right. Like I said before, I was raised up the right way, so
I mean, have you ever had any negative...
What would you do if another cop called you a nigger? Or worse?
Would that happen, sir?
Shit. There's never been a black cop in this city. Now, if we make you an officer, you will, in effect, be the Jackie Robinson of the Colorado Springs Police Force. And if you know anything about Jackie Robinson, you know he had to take a lot of guff from his fellow teammates, the fans, other teams, and the press.
I know the Jackie Roosevelt Robinson story, sir.
Good. So knowing that, if somebody calls you a nigger, will you be able to turn the other cheek?
If I had to, sir, yes. Yes, I would.
Son, the mayor, the chief, and I think you might be the man to open things up around here. Chief Bridges will be your branch Ricky.
I'll have your back, but I can only do so much. The weight of this is going to be on you, and you alone.
Thank you for the opportunity, gentlemen.
How close to reality is that scene?
The part about being called a nigger accurate. I was actually, the gentleman that Isaiah Whitlock represents was James Woods, who was the city personnel manager at that time. And he was on a mission to integrate that department, to introduce blacks into it. They already had 2 Hispanic officers. They had no blacks working for the department at all. And he was on a mission to integrate that department with the black presence. And at the time I applied, I was the only black presence there was. So in my interview, there were also 2 other people, one other person there, the captain of the Uniform Patrol Division, the chief of detectives, assistant chief of detectives, and James Woods. And it was James who asked me, can you be the Jackie Robinson of this department? Can you not fight back like Jackie did if somebody calls you a nigger? And I was asked several quote unquote nigger questions. What if this happens and you're called a nigger? What if that happens and you're called a nigger? And this was 1972. They couldn't get away with that today. But one thing I want to point out to the audience, though, Spike toyed with the timeline. When that incident actually took place, I was 19 years old. I was not yet a police officer. I was applying for the police department as a police cadet. The cadet was a precursor to eventually becoming an officer when you turn 21. So at the age of 19, I had to go through that battery of questions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. Yeah, Spike sort of set this movie toward the toward the early 70s, but you actually joined the force toward the latter part of the 70s, correct?
Yeah, when you first see John David as me in a uniform, he's working in the records section. That actually took place. But I was a cadet at the time. I wore a brown uniform, not a blue one. Cadets wore a brown uniform. We were basically high school graduates who wanted to be cops, but we were not yet 21, the age to legally carry a gun and be a cop. So we were basically police officers in training. So when you see John David for the first time on screen in uniform, he is actually portraying the 25-year-old me as opposed to the 19-year-old me when that actually happened.
Why did you decide to go undercover? Was it your choice or was it the police department's choice to put you undercover?
I hate uniforms. I don't like wearing a uniform, period. And I like the freewheeling style of undercover cops. I like the fact that I could look like a bum if I wanted to. I could look like a black militant if I wanted to. But underneath it all, I carried a gun and a badge and I could enforce the law. And I like the fact that you put yourself, by the nature of your job, you put yourself in relatively dangerous, potentially dangerous situations. And your only weapon to get out of that is not your gun, it's your ability to communicate, to talk. And I found that thrilling and exhilarating. It was fun.
That's also the fun part of the movie. That's a great segue to my next question, because you talk about the ability to use your gift of gab, conversation, your ability to create dialogue. And that's what really sets this movie into motion. And that's what sort of like, that's how you first interacted with the organization, the Ku Klux Klan, was by telephone, correct?
Yeah, I initiated the whole thing via a phone call. The investigation on my part was done, for the most part, via the phone calls I made to David Duke and to Ken Odell, the Colorado Springs chapter president. My only face-to-face physical encounter was when I was assigned to be Duke's bodyguard, but everything else undercover on my part was done on the phone for obvious reasons. I mean, God bless me with a beautiful skin and we couldn't meet face-to-face.
Speaking of being able to meet face to face, why don't we watch a scene, one of the early scenes from the movie BLACKKKLANSMAN, directed by Spike Lee and co-written by Spike Lee and Kelvin Wilmot. Here's a scene. Here's an early scene from the movie of your exchange on the telephone.
Yeah, who's this?
Ron Stallworth here.
This is Walter, returning your call. From the organization?
The organization?
That's right. We appreciate your interest. What's your story?
Well, since you asked, I hate niggers. I hate Jews. Huh? Spics and mix. Dagos and chinks. But my mouth to God's ears, I really hate those nigger rats. And anyone else, really, that doesn't have pure white Aryan blood running through their veins. My sister, Pamela, she was just recently accosted by one of those black coons.
Is that so?
Yeah. Every time I think about that black baboon putting his filthy black hands on her purest white, driven snow body. I mean pure, Walter. She's a saint. She's an angel. It makes me want to puke.
You are just the kind of guy that we are looking for. Listen, when can you meet?
How about Friday night after I get off work?
That's a deal, buddy boy. We'll get right back to you with the details. Take care now.
God bless white America.
So tell me, Ron, in real life, did you rehearse different types of approaches, different types of voices, different types of styles? I mean, how did you know you could deliver and be convincing?
Because I was good at my job. No, I did no rehearsals. When you're undercover, you are thrown into a scenario, a situation, and immediately you pull the switch and you're in character. What did I do? I just simply responded to questions that were posed to me over the phone and made up a story as I went along. None of that was rehearsed. It happened fairly close to that, but there was no rehearsal. There was no, and one thing people should understand is when you're an undercover cop, you don't have the luxury of a Spike Lee to say, cut, let's move on to the next scene. You literally have to move on and call cut on your own and move on your own and, you know, get yourself out of the situation that you've gotten yourself into. And that's part of the fun of being an undercover cop.
Now, Ron, I'm gonna have to admit one thing. When I first heard about the premise of the film, BLACKKKLANSMAN, I think I had the same opinion that Spike Lee, who directed the movie, had. It sounded almost like a Dave Chappelle skit. How did you know this story, your story, would make a great book, and why did you decide to write this story, and how did you go about the process of writing this book?
Well, one thing I want to point out is my story actually took place in October of 1978. The Clayton Bigsby sketch of Dave Chappelle didn't come along until almost 20 years later.
Exactly.
So he was copying me, not me copying him.
No, that's well documented. That is true.
I get asked that question a lot.
So Dave owes you a royalty check then.
Yeah, hey, I want to get it, yes. I wrote the story. First of all, I wrote it without any intention or thinking that it was going to make a good movie. You don't write with a movie in mind, at least I don't.
Okay.
I knew I had a very unique story. I knew it was interesting. I felt the story should be told. I mean, stranger than life. Who would suspect that a black man would have the nerve to try to join the Ku Klux Klan and then pull a con off with these idiots, the so-called genetically superior race, and make fools out of all of them, including David Duke, the Grand Wizard. So I knew that was going to be an interesting story, and it was worth telling. And because I had been told to destroy the files, I kept the files. And from those files, those official police reports, I put the story together and wrote the book.
So how'd you learn the process of writing? Because it's not easy to write anything and extremely difficult to write a book.
As a police officer, that's all you do is write reports. And I literally had 2 thick notebooks of reports generated from this investigation. It was just a matter of me putting them in a cohesive, coherent manner. And the dialogue was later thrown in. Some of the dialogue I remember, others we kind of made up in order to fuse it all together. But the story itself is very accurate, very true to life in terms of how Spike portrayed it. And writing it, I started writing in March of 2013, and approximately, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months later, I was finished. By January, I was finished. And I felt I had done enough to tell the story. I had edited it to the point where I was satisfied, and it was just a matter of finding a publisher.
How many publishing companies turned you down?
Actually, I had written it for a friend of mine. He was a retired Santa Ana Police Department officer who had a publishing company, Police and Fire Publishing. And I had met him about a year before and told him my story. And when he stopped laughing, he said, "If you write it, I'll publish it." I said, "Okay," and forgot about it. So when I started writing, I knew I had a publisher ready. It was just a matter of getting the story down. And once he got it, he ran with it. He put it out on the market initially, and it wasn't until 2017, I think, that Flatiron, a subsidiary of Macmillan, they came. They were aware of the book. They generally don't republish books that have already been out, but they felt this one was a story that needed to be told into a wider audience, and they signed me to bring it to the mass market.
And then it became a bestseller, correct?
#1 New York Times bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for 9 weeks. For 2 weeks, it was at #1. So I'm very proud of that.
Then how long did it take before the book got optioned for the film?
Probably within a year. I had been talking to my business manager, Andy Francis, had been talking to a producer, Shawn Reddick. Shawn Reddick was associated with QC Entertainment at that time. And Shawn, I flew out to LA and met with Shawn, Andy, and myself. And I told them the story in person. I wanted to look him in the eye. When you're undercover, you look people in the eye, except for this investigation. So I wanted to look him in the eye. And I told him my story. They had questions. He and a couple of his producer friends were there. They had questions of me. And I gave him the whole spiel about being an undercover cop, being the first Black detective, about writing the story, etc. And the thing took off from that point on. He brought it to Jordan Peele. Jordan Peele asked him if it was true. He said, yeah. Jordan initially was going to produce and direct it, but at some point, Jordan felt that he didn't have the proper skill set to direct it, so he sought Spike. And Spike asked the same question. Is this true? Is this for real? Jordan said, absolutely. Spike said, I'm in. The rest, as they say, is history.
Been a great run, been a great ride, and terrific history. So Ron, we have a question from one of the AFI screenwriting fellows. Her name is Alex Dennis Renner. She's gonna come on and ask you a question.
Ron, Shawn, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. This is such a great story. It's one of my favorite movies. It's so cool to talk to you, Ron. I am a writer with the AFI Conservatory. So when we talk about adaptation, coming from the writer's perspective, the hardest part with handling those stories is what should we leave as is and what should we elevate and dramatize in order to take a really compelling story like yours and turn it into something cinematic. So what I would love to know is how much of the book and your experience was left as is, and how much did Spike and Kevin sort of tinker with it or elevate it, and of that story that was turned into more of a narrative, how much are you okay with that being altered for sake of making a movie?
Well, first of all, when I met with Shawn Reddick and his partners, I told them that I knew that once Hollywood got a hold of this story, I had no control over anything. I said, I would like for you gentlemen to be truthful and honest to the basic story as much as you can be, and more importantly for me, be honest to the police profession. When you see a lot of movies about cops, you see stupid things like cops running down the street, shooting their gun in a crowd of people at a suspect, and that just doesn't happen in real life, and if they do, their heads are put on a pole. I basically didn't want to see things like that, and I asked them, please don't do stupid stuff. Don't send a car with lights and sirens blaring and flashing to a scene of a crime when there's no need for lights and sirens. You only turn those things on when you have to. And when you do turn them on, you turn them off just before you get there because you want to creep up on the bad guy. But in the movies, you always see licensed sirens. He could be 10 miles away. They got licensed sirens going. He could be on an empty highway, no traffic, licensed sirens are going. So I asked him, don't do stupid stuff like that. In that vein, they were very honest about my story. They didn't do real stupid stuff. Probably the stupidest thing that you see in the movie that would not have happened in real life was where Adam Driver shoots the gun as John David, as me, is running away from the house where they had the Klan meeting. He was basically trying to stop them from shooting John David. And secondly, he was trying to show his bona fides as being a fellow white supremacist. That would not have happened in real life. I would have figured out another way to do it without firing my gun, because my butt would have been in the ringer if I had done so. So I like to tell people that probably 75, 80% of my story is in there. The other 20, they toyed with.
Wow, great question, Alex. Another thing I wanted to talk to you in that sort of same vein is reality versus non-reality is Spike Lee said for the scene in which they're practicing at the target range that they actually found those targets online. What did the targets actually look like in real life? Because that's one of the scenes that blew me away, and I heard that John David Washington didn't want to see the targets before he filmed that scene, and when he walked up on them, it's one of the most impactful things he filmed in the entire movie.
Yeah, I've read that too about John David in that scene. Spoiler alert, never happened. That scene never happened in real life.
So that's one of the fictitious scenes that Alex was sort of referencing.
Yeah, that never happened. These guys were gun nuts. The meeting at the house that John David or that Adam Driver went to, a meeting actually took place at the house for my white counterpart, but it was at the house of the president, not the Felix character. So that scene was toyed with a little bit to bring it to life, but it never really happened in that fashion. When the scene actually took place in real life, it was at the president's house, the chapter president's house. He had 13 guns in his collection, including a shotgun and hunting rifles. And he showed all of his guns to my white counterpart, showing them off, bragging about them and whatnot. And they had the potential, and these guys were soldiers for the most part. They were gun nuts. They had the potential to do all the stuff that they talked about, but they never did. The bombing that you see at the end of the movie never happened. Spoiler alert on that. But I did have conversations with them over the phone about their wanting to bomb the 2 gay bars that we had in town for no other reason than they were gay and they wanted to bomb them. They had the trading. A couple of them were ordnance trained in the Army at Fort Carson. So they played with explosives. They could have bombed. They didn't, but they talked about it a lot on the phone with me.
All right, true or false, when you found out that your book was going to be turned into a film, you actually wanted Denzel Washington to portray you?
Hey, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? I mean, one of the top actors of our generation, Academy Award winner, plus he kind of looks like me. He's a nice looking guy.
So
I like to think so.
How
my wife
ironic
was get cracking up.
But how ironic was it that it was actually his son that
you know,
played you?
I initially wanted Denzel, yes. I knew that if Denzel played the character with his background, the theaters would be packed just on his name alone. And
you're forever the salesman. You're forever the salesman. I like that. You're business savvy, man.
But I also recognized from the very beginning that Denzel was too old. He's about 2 years younger than me. So there's no way he could have played a 25-year-old Ron Stallworth. So ironically, when I found out that Denzel was John David was the one that Spike chose, I was tickled to death for that. I figured if I can't have the daddy, I'll take the son. And John David knocked it out of the park. I'm so proud of him.
Yeah, speaking of knocking out of the park, I mean, I was thrilled to death when I found out that Spike Lee was going to direct this film, and I thought what he and Kevin Wilmot did with the screenplay was phenomenal. Now, I know this scene probably didn't happen in real life, but for me, it was one of the more impactful scenes. So I also want to find out from you, how impactful was it for you? And I'm talking about the Hera Bellafonte speech. And I just want to show this clip to set it up, then come back and get your feelings about it.
That started out as a nice spring day back there in Waco, Texas. May 15th, 1916. Jesse Washington was a friend of mine. He was 17, I was 18. We kind of looked at Jesse and called him slow. Today, you'd call him mentally retarded. They claimed Jesse raped and murdered a white woman by the name of Lucy Fryer. They put Jesse on trial, and he was convicted by an all-white jury after they deliberated for only 4 minutes.
Your thoughts on that scene? That's one of the most incredible scenes I've ever seen, because I love the juxtaposition that Spike sets up between Black power, white power, and the way he utilized the film, The Birth of a Nation, opposite Hera Bellafonte talking about an actual lynching. I just thought that was incredible filmmaking. It's one of my all-time favorite scenes ever.
My wife and I love this scene for one reason and one reason only. Hera Bellafonte is in it. His portrayal actually moved us very both. We were very honored to meet him at the premiere in Brooklyn when it made its national debut. And Spike honored me by asking me to walk him out on the stage to applause. It was very unexpected. I didn't have any inkling Spike was going to do that. And today I am honored to say that I was the one that escorted him out to face the audience. I recognize Mr. Bellafonte's history of civil rights activists and whatnot, marching with Dr. King. And it's one of the highlights of my life, let me put it that way. But that scene, first of all, it never happened in real life, but Spike wove that into the story, and it made for a powerful moment all the way around in terms of telling this story. Like you, I like that juxtaposition between the two sides, Black power, white power, going at each other. It's just a very, very powerful scene. I want to point out one other thing. Spike and Kevin Wilmot co-wrote a script that was already out, written by David Rabinowitz and Charlie Wachtel. They wrote the initial screenplay, and then they're the ones that brought it to Sean Reddick, and as I told you, the path that it took. But when Spike got involved, Spike told me that he needed to add a little more black to it. So him and Kevin made it more black. And ultimately it won the Academy Award for all 4 gentlemen. And Charlie and David, I'm very proud because this was the first screenplay they had written for a major motion picture.
I was going to say, Spike Lee not only made it a little more black, but he also made it a little more gold. Yeah. They won the Oscar for that, and it was well deserved. In fact, much deserved. So yeah, I like the way you said that. Spike Lee said he needed to make it a little more black. All right, before we get out of here, though, you know, I got to set this up. Do you still have the Ku Klux Klan organizational card in your possession?
I don't have it on me, but I can get it real quick.
No, I'm gonna make you run around, but you still have it, right?
Oh, I've carried it with me since I got it in the mail in January of '79.
Man, you still keep it in your wallet?
Everywhere I go. There you go.
Oh, there it is. The actual Ku Klux Klan membership card. It looks in good. It looks in pretty good shape, man. How you keeping it in such a good shape? That thing's almost what, 40, 45 years old?
It's laminated.
Okay.
I laminated it because I knew I was going to keep it and didn't want anything to happen. I want to point one thing out. On the back of this card, it has the personal code for the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, and it says, I pledge, and there are 6 pledges.
Okay.
The interesting one is number 5, to never discuss any Klan affairs with any plainclothes officer on a state, local, or federal level. Every time that sucker was talking to me, he was snitching on himself.
He was breaking one of their own rules.
He was breaking his own rule. Yeah.
Breaking his own rule on the back of the card.
As I said in my book, they were not the brightest light bulbs in the socket. And if that's an example of the genetically superior race, the master race, hey, we've got this battle won.
And your story is, I mean, I'm glad they actually made this into a film, but it's almost like so surreal that it almost, someone would almost tell you, we can't make this. It just sounds too fabricated. But
well,
it's such a,
I know people read the book and they watch the movie and they shake their heads, they laugh and whatnot. It's not a comedy movie, by the way.
No, it's not.
They shake their heads and they laugh. But I want them to understand that even though I was the one involved in the actual incident, I'm still laughing about it all these many years later. I still talk to my wife about the fact that I can't believe that we pulled this off. And I want to give credit to the 2 people that were involved in this investigation with me. The Adam Driver character in real life, he is, I've only identified him as Chuck. He didn't want to work with me in terms of telling the story, so I kept his identity quiet. Chuck is the name that I use in the book. And Chuck was a good undercover cop, and that's why I chose him. He's about my height, my weight at the time. And he willingly gave up his undercover identity for the sake of assuming the character of Ron Stallworth, white supremacist. And then I want to recognize James Rose, Jimmy Rose. Jimmy was the one playing Adam's partner in the movie. He's based on a real character. And Jimmy is now a retired DEA agent. He left the department about 1984, and he became a DEA agent. He retired, and he's now stationed with the U.S. Ambassador's office in El Salvador.
Real quickly, Ron, because of everything we've gone through in the past several months, what are your thoughts on today's issues with police? You're a Black man, you're a police officer. What are your thoughts?
I am a proud police officer with a 32-year career over 4 states. I'm very proud of the career that I had. I'm very proud and devoted to my profession. But when I see or hear about obvious wrongdoings on the part of police, when I see them committing acts of brutality against innocent victims, when I see them violating their constitutional oath to serve and protect and to do it with integrity and honor, that pisses me off, and I have no problems calling them out for the rogue, corrupt, bad apples that they are. The only way the profession will remain honorable is when we police ourselves and clean it up. And when we have these things going on like we have all seen with George Floyd, with Ahmaud Arbery, you could go on the list, down the list. Those things need to be called out for what they are. These are bad cops, bad people. They're violating the law. They don't belong in the profession. They should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They are not my brother officers, and I have no use for them.
Well, you wrote an incredible book, which was turned into an amazing film. In your own words, Ron, tell me, why do Black stories matter?
Black stories matter because we matter. We are America. Our story is an American story. We helped build this nation, dating back to 1619. And people need to understand who we as a people are. We are not just the people that you see in stereotype movies, playing Aunt Jemima roles, Mammy roles. We are not the people that you read in the history books, those that were taught Black history. We are not the ones that were slaves, nursing women nursing white babies and so forth at the expense of their own children. We are human beings. Even though some of us in our history were raped by presidents like Thomas Jefferson, we had lives. They had lives. They had decent lives, honorable lives for the times. And they made productive use of their time on this earth. And as a result, you and I are living proof of that. We're their progeny. So Black stories matter, and people should learn more about Black history, because Black history is American history.
Well, I'll say this, Ron, a great starting point to learn more about Black history is to watch BLACKKKLANSMAN. I want to say thanks to everyone for tuning into the AFI Movie Club. It's been a pleasure talking to you, man. I love your energy, man. I love your spirit, man. You are an amazing human being. And you can check out BLACKKKLANSMAN. Just go to AFI.com. Remember, the rental is free. Get a chance to see the movie based off the New York Times best-selling book written by Ron Stallworth, man. It's been amazing and a pleasure to talk with you, man. I really appreciate it, man. Write another book, man. I want to see another film, man. This is real Black history right here. I love it.
I'm actually working on another book.
I thought so, man. I knew you had another one in you, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot, man. AFI.com. Check out Academy Award-winning BLACKKKLANSMAN. Thanks, Spike. Thanks, Kevin Wilmot.
Take care.
Take care, Ron.